Our guest for this edition of Happy Times and Places, Dan Rebellato, had a play on Radio 4 called You and Me on January the 4th, 2021. It is available on BBC Sounds until February the 4th, 2021. You and Me by Dan Rebellato. Welcome to Happy Times and Places, in which I, Toby Hadoke, am on a mission to guess my special guests' favourite things about a Doctor Who story of their choice.
Hi, Toby. I have chosen the Ribos operation.
Well, hello. That was the voice of the playwright Dan Rebellato, who has chosen, as you heard, and as you know, because it's in all the writing that you have read before listening to these bits. We are on the Ribos Operation Episode 3. I'm having a whale of a time. I hope this is a story that you like, and if it's one that you hadn't liked prior to this, it's maybe inspired you to go back and watch it. If you've never seen it, why are you listening to this? Watch it first. Well, do what you want to do, but I think it's better to unfold, having me ruining it for you after you've actually seen it unsullied. But I am going to press play, and I hope you are too. In 3, 2, 1. As I think I touched upon last week, last episode, I can sort of understand why people for whom Doctor Who is stories of monsters and invasions and all of that, and that's very much me. Certainly when I was younger, I'm not sure this would have massively floated my boat if I did see it, and I may well have seen it, but I don't remember it. But I know the Pirate Planet must have been the repeat, and this wasn't repeated at that point. Tom's fooling about a bit here. I'm not sure I approve of people like me calling Tom Baker Tom. I don't like it when the magazine does it. And if I write articles, I use the person's surname because I don't like it when a journalist is too familiar, especially when writing. These are not our friends; these are our heroes. But I have worked with him, and he's nice to me. But I'm aware it might come across. I'm aware you might judge me for it, and part of me doesn't blame you. But I'm not meaning to suggest that we're bosom buddies. And I think, as a Doctor Who fan, one should have more deference than sometimes I think Doctor Who fans show the show. I'm a fan. I am subservient to the show. That's how I see it. Anyway, let's not get into that. It's boring. Which this is not. But it's interesting seeing glimmers of Tom Baker's, Mr. Baker's, Lord Baker of Gallifrey's, messing about there, putting Garen in front of him, all of that. The Scringe Stone. That's brilliant. I love the payoff to that, and that the graph is, the Scringe Stone in Unstoff sounds so ridiculous, but when Graf says it, this is brilliant. I like the way that Paul Seed goes on this journey, and never sends up the Graf. He is still a dangerous man, and I like Sholak's sort of wry amusement. He's an acidic general who's seen it all, but it means he can afford to take his time and enjoy how amusing he finds this guy who he would kill without a second's thought. I buy it all. I believe it all. So yeah, as I say, I can understand why for people who like a base under siege for some monsters, this might not be their idea of what Doctor Who is. And I mean, in many ways, it's much more like a sort of funny historical. The monsters are very cursory. Its setting is not futuristic. It's in a BBC costume drama. It's in a it is essentially, it's almost like it's on the more blood there. I don't remember that blood. You don't see much blood in Doctor Who. It's almost like blood is slightly too realistic. I know there's a bit, if you look hard, you can glimpse it. Thorne has a bit, doesn't he, when he gets a spear in him in The Power of Kroll. Kondo gets his stomach blown open. That's a slightly different. It's more than just blood, but you don't see an awful lot of blood in Doctor Who. There was a bit in Day of the Daleks when Boaz gets killed. I'm not going to sit here and adumbrate all the moments you see blood in Doctor Who, but I would say it's it's not seen as often as it would in real life have been seen had all of the people who've died in Doctor Who shed blood when they perhaps should have done. Which means as I say, I think it's quite novel when you see it. But actually, in a story like this, it's okay because there's less. It's less alarming, I think, than if you'd seen it in a story set on 20th century Earth with people who worked in shops and offices, rather than sort of fruity-voiced intergalactic conmen dressed in cast-off costumes from a production of War and Peace. Hello, K9. How are you going to get out of the TARDIS? K9's one, of course, that divides people as well, isn't it? I wonder if a lot of that is people who were pre-K9, who had K9 introduced to them, who saw it as an unpleasant intrusion into their series, and people for whom K9. My first memory is The Invisible Enemy, so I don't remember Doctor Who without K9. Now, the other Shreve here is Oliver Maguire, who's an Irish actor who in things like Ballycus Angel and stuff. And I think when he died, I found a death notice for him. He was a relative of the actress Tara Fitzgerald. But yeah, and he was still acting well into the 21st century. Keeping going, but died in 2012, I think. Binro the Heretic, and actually, again, on paper, this is Guard, but he gets one of the best scenes in it, and he does it well. There's a lot of history in that, and I love Binro the Heretic. I love Timothy Bateson. Timothy Bateson, a fine actor of stage and screen. The first person to play Basil Fawlty. What? I'll explain later. There's nobody like the Seeker in Doctor Who either. I love the Seeker. The visual, the makeup, the performance, what she is, just because, I mean, her prophecy comes true, but I don't, in my Doctor Who universe, psychic prophecies don't come true. I love that scream. I love that what she does with her hands there, and the makeup. I mean, I don't believe all of this. I'm a rational man. I can believe in a laser gun and a green alien monster. I don't believe in psychic bone shakers, but it entirely works in this. In conception, in execution, in look, in performance. Their reaction to it helps because these are very serious people. And again, these two guys judge their performances so brilliantly. So just when you think, the story is this sort of, con, it takes on this caper. It's a word I've used a lot, I'm aware. It takes on this slightly sort of odd, almost, the ancient Romans, had their prophecies and their soothsayers. So it's a bit like, suddenly you get, having had a sort of, if not a comedy of errors, I've mentioned it. Sort of, this is a bit redolent in look of BBC Shakespeare. Well, then if it you suddenly throw in the soothsayer from Julius Caesar as well, but with a painted face and a screamy thing and antlers, like sort of Herne the Hunter's batty sister, but entirely convincingly done. And you can tell that Tom Baker absolutely adores and admires Ian Cuthbertson. You can tell that sometimes Tom Baker was probably ignoring everybody and being a bit cussed when the cameras were switched off. I suspect he was having a whale of a time with Ian Cuthbertson. Ian Cuthbertson is in the movie Gorillas in the Mist, of course, and he was in a thing called Sutherland's Law. He's in the last couple of episodes of Survivors. He had a fine body of work. I think he became. Oh, he's in Inspector Morse as well. It's a decent part in Inspector Morse, but I think he had a stroke in the early 80s, I think. So it changed. His appearance changed a little bit. He was a bit more gaunt in some of his later roles, but he's a marvelously twinkly actor, but totally believable. So why am I not choosing Garin? Because I don't think I am. It's almost like on that Outpost Gallifrey thing, I'm overlooking him unnecessarily because I'm looking at the wrong things. He is so good. I'm almost taking him for granted, though. I think is part of it, because he's so good. But I expect him to be good. He's Ian Cuthbertson. And that was what I haven't talked about. That sometimes in this, Tom Baker's lip, because it isn't in this scene, but while I remember, Tom Baker, and it's funny. His lip has been bitten by a dog. And to hear him tell the story, he says, and this fellow had a dog called George, and I gave him a sausage. And I said, here's a sausage, George. This is Tom Baker waxing lyrical. A dog called George. That sounds like a Tom Baker story. A sausage. That sounds like a Tom Baker story. And then, of course, in the DVD making of, it's Paul Seed's dog. I think it is called George, and I think there is a sausage involved. And sometimes Tom Baker, who is, I think, a teller of tales, or an embellisher of tales, which is what we love about him. That's why he is adored by people who think he's Shirley Williams whilst clasping him to their aunt's bosom. It's a bit like when I think he talked of his scarf being knitted by a lady called Begonia Pope, and you go, yeah, you've made that name up. No, there was a lady called Begonia Pope who knitted Tom Baker's scarf. In fact, I was in discussions with one of her relatives, so I have emailed back and forth with. I think I read that. He gets to say right, sir, and I think Pat Gorman, who plays Trooper Crow, got an extra 50 quid for that. You increase your fee if you get a couple of lines. Now, of course, they hide actors, and as what in the older days would have been a speaking part is they do a bit of an over the shoulder shot and do a bit in ADR, so they don't have to pay anybody properly. So parts that used to be speaking parts played by actors are now a sort of a cheat played by an extra and an ADR person, which just saves a little bit of money. It's probably something that only I care about, but it is a way of eroding the opportunities of actors and the money goes somewhere, but it goes less and less to the performers. And, you know, good actors are worth their weight in gold. And good performances, they speak to us. They entertain us. They impress us. They sometimes distract us. They sometimes give a bit of extra sparkle to something that needs it. There's absolutely no question. And I try not to think of things in advance, because it's important that I watch this. And there have been some times when I've been surprised by a story. I go, I'll choose that bit I wasn't expecting to. There's no way I'm not going to choose a scene between two characters who've never been in Doctor Who before and are never in Doctor Who again. Neither of them played by particularly famous actors. You know, but Bateson, I think, was recognisable as an actor because he was a very busy character actor. Plaskett maybe from the advert, but I don't. Yeah, maybe. But you know, they're not people you'd ever put in a list of guest stars who've turned up in. You'd never believe which actors have turned up in Doctor Who. The material they're given is lovely, so that's a start. The fact that this has no impact on the story at all. It doesn't even have... Sometimes, you know, you get nice character moments where somebody will tell a story or something like that, which thematically, you know, echoes another element of the story, gives you a nice little bit of symmetry to the storytelling, or emphasizes an element of the storytelling, or helps to drive it or illustrate it, or just keep that theme going throughout the story. This is pretty much an unrelated segue into the private story of a character that the Doctor doesn't even... Does he meet? But doesn't have much to do with. If anything, I'll be interested to note, actually. I don't know off the top of my head, and under the pressure of having to talk and entertain you. I think it's such a beautiful moment where two, in the whole history of Doctor Who, relatively unimportant people in a hovel, away from the main plot, where a shabby loss of a man at the end of his life, if that Shreve's got anything to go by, this man is knackered. I think that's beautiful, that silent... he doesn't know how to articulate how happy that confirmation makes him. This knackered old man who's been called every name under the sun and disbelieved, and will never get any sort of victory apart from somebody saying, "You were right." And I know this isn't a story of highfalutin ambition, but he wrote that scene for a reason, probably to pad the episode out a bit. But my God, if you're going to be padded out, you may as well be padded out by the best quality material. I think that's an extraordinary scene. I find it terribly moving. I find it very, very well done. Timothy Bateson, yes, the first actor to play Basil Fawlty, because in an episode of Doctor in the House, Doctor at Large, great the way Timothy Bateson's looking around because he can hear the voice coming through the communicator. He's a comic character, you know, but that's so beautiful, that bit. But the first iteration of the Basil Fawlty character, who was based on a horrible hotelier called Donald Sinclair, was in an episode of the Doctor series, and Timothy Bateson played the part. So obviously as a much smaller, because he's not as tall as John Cleese, stuffier, sort of more officious character of the types that Bateson often essayed. So that's one of his claims to fame. The other is that he was lucky in the very first production of Waiting for Godot. It was Peter Woodthorpe Paul Damon, Peter Bull, and Timothy Bateson. Oh, and Michael Walker, who's in The Time Monster and the Claws of Axos, is the boy. But the Waiting for Godot, a major moment in European theatre history, and Lucky, who remains silent and then has this massive speech of nonsense. That's one that has no instructions to how it should be played, really, apart from the fact there's no punctuation in it, and it's a really bizarre and strange thing. The first person to do it professionally on the stage was Timothy Bateson, on the English stage anyway. Ever. Love these catacombs and these candles. This is all desperately atmospheric. It's all old tricks from all sorts of dramas and films, but a load of candles in a catacomb does it for me. You don't see them in Doctor Who as often as you'd think, and I think loads of candles is more atmospheric than the sort of than the Peladon, flambeau on the wall. I don't know why. I'm sorry. Spoiler alert. I'm going to be voting for the Binro the Heretic scene, and if Dan doesn't, I would think he's only doing that in order to trick me out of a point. But if he does, that means we're even Stevens going into part 4, which is very exciting because, as I say, if I ever win this, it will be a miracle. I love what Tom Baker has, that slight. I'm sort of laughing underneath this. It's something that, whilst being deadly serious, I mean, he's blessed with that marvelous voice and the marvelous presence and the profile, and he can, he juts his jaw and his teeth sometimes, doesn't he, with a sort of grittier insolence, but also he has that puckered flirtation with ridiculousness that's never too far away, and those eyes twinkling with intensity and madness. He's extraordinary. See, now this is, I think, my problem, because I mean, in any other story I'd have chosen the Seeker. She's got a cross on her nose. Ian Cuthbertson as Garen, Paul Seed as the Graf. I mean, in lesser stories, Robert Keegan, and special mention to his scar, which I think is a smart piece of makeup by Christine Walmsley Cotham. So, a disclaimer that an apologies for repeating myself, but I think it's very obvious for me to choose an actor or a performance. So I am going to try and seek something more than that, because I love the sort of acting in these shows and I love the sort of actors, so it would be easy for me to just go episode 1 Ian Cuthbertson, episode 2 Paul Seed, episode 3 Timothy Bateson. Do you know what I mean? So I have to push myself in order to be as entertaining as one can possibly be whilst talking through a Doctor Who story at people I don't know are listening. But I hope you're having a marvellous time wherever you are. He's delightful, and he's got, he is a sort of absent-minded sort of comic character, but there's depth and humanity there, and they do lots of sort of comic business. But yeah, the Shrivensals are the only monsters in this, and we really don't see all that much of them. And I actually think the head is pretty good. Never like a wobbly claw. And I think, if you'd been a BBC visual effects designer who could solve the problem of the wobbly claw, you might have saved the Caves of Androzani from a bit of embarrassment at a key moment. The Shrivensal, again, at a fairly important credibility moment. But there we go. Such are the things that you had to contend with when making Doctor Who in 1978. So I hope you're liking this, and if this is a story that is unfamiliar to, because it's weird. It's a story I really like. It's not a story I watch often. If you ask me to choose which story I like more, Warriors of the Deep or Ribos Operation, I would say which story I think is better. I would easily choose the Ribos Operation, and I think it is better in terms of the quality of production, acting, script, everything like that. There was a naughty where should I put my hands joke that men in the 1970s could do that perpetrated there. And this is the episode ending, isn't it? Yeah. Great. Good, because I was running out of steam a little bit because it is ridiculous o'clock. And I don't want to do a disservice to this. But I think the point I was making was I love this story and I think it's very high quality. I have seen Warriors of the Deep more often, and of an afternoon I might like the sort of the simple base under CG business going on in Warriors of the Deep more than this, which I think I have to invest in a little bit more. It's not quite as simple a pleasure. And as I say, I think it is better in the way that I think that The Empty Child is probably the best story of that season, and yet it's a story I've watched less often than some of the others, because I think if something is very high quality, it sometimes almost daunts you, or it might just be me, but I know we do it at home here when sometimes we go, oh, should we watch Inside Number 9 because we both love it, and then go, no, because we're not quite in that mood. We want something almost less good. Isn't that weird? Yeah. That sometimes if something is better quality, it is perhaps harder to digest, which is, I suppose the allure of junk food is that it is effortless. So that I think maybe there are easier stories to watch and let wash over you, whereas I think you have to actively engage with this more, but you get more out of it. Yeah. I don't know what that proves, but I think I was just trying to get to why perhaps, even though it's a story I love, I'm not as familiar with it as I am with others that I wouldn't publicly profess my love for, but, would have a little dalliance with and then wouldn't tell anybody about. I'd use and abuse them, whereas, I would introduce the Ribos Operation to my mother. Right. I'm choosing the scene between Unstoff and Binro. It's one of the greatest scenes in the whole of Doctor Who. And isn't it amazing that it actually doesn't need to be there? But I unreservedly love it, partially for that, but for what it stands for, but for the humanity at the core of it, the decency at the core of it, and the quiet, not expressed anger at the injustice that breeds it in the first place, that you as a viewer feel, and that Unstoff's unshowy, quiet, it's not tearful. He's not doing a big heroic gesture, just his quiet affirmation that man was right and that man matters. I think is a truly beautiful moment in a story full of ripe silliness. Wonderful. I love it. I love Doctor Who, and I love that Doctor Who has things like that in it. I'm being terribly serious. I'm sorry. I'm being terribly serious about a story that is in many ways as daft as a brush. Dan's got to choose this.
So in episode 3, I would be surprised if you don't guess this, because I think it's one of the great bits in the classic series, but it's the Benro the Heretic subplot. The Benro story, of course, is it really is a subplot. Benro's role really is only to hide Unstoff quite briefly for a portion of the story. So and so he's easily replaceable with something else. But what they do is they create this wonderful little subplot of a kind of Galileo figure, but Galileo who was tortured by the Inquisition. So he's been forced to recant his astronomical beliefs in stars and a kind of heliocentric universe and all those sorts of things. And you have that wonderful little sort of magical thinking, wish fulfillment moment of somebody being able to come in to an entirely broken man who is right and telling him your life, it has not been wasted, you are completely vindicated. And it is beautifully done. It's beautifully done. It's wonderfully acted by Nigel Plaskett as Unstoff and Timothy Bateson as Binro. Timothy, who is also an extraordinary actor with a great track record, was in the first ever cast of Waiting for Godot in Britain. I think he played Lucky in Waiting for Godot in the mid-1950s. So he's a really extraordinary actor. And they create a thing that carves out a little space for a story that is very unusual, I think, in the classic series, something that is that perfectly crafted and actually that emotional. It's a really moving moment in this actually very fast-paced story, where the story gives us that, carves out that little bit of space for something that is very precious, I think.
Yes, he chose Binro and also knew that he was in the first production of Waiting for Godot. I knew I liked him, Dan Rebellato. But rather like the Ribos operation, I know Dan and I like him, but I've not seen him as often as perhaps I should. We're very much, internet friends. So yes, so a reminder, perhaps, to tune in to the things that that we like, perhaps a little bit more often. I think we take that away with, but also I think, that point that he makes about, life meaning something, and it, I think is lovely. So yeah, if you haven't given the Ribos operation much heed, it's got some great stuff in it, including that rather wonderful scene. I think I'm going to go to bed because I don't want to do this story a disservice of sleepwalking my way through episode 4. So good night, and don't forget to look at the stars. Thanks for listening to Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest was Dan Rebellato. This episode's featured patrons are Rob Leonard, Stephen White, Matthew Houliston, Gregory Hudson, and Rich Wiggins. The music for this podcast is specially composed by Dave Gates, and the podcast artwork is by Dylan Patterson. Please do not forget to rate and review this wherever you can, and to please subscribe to whichever podcast feed you get it from. All that stuff really does help, and it also helps if you subscribe to my YouTube channel too, where this podcast appears in video form. Dan Rebellato's play You and Me is on BBC Sounds until February the 4th. You can become a patron at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. There are extra goodies there, or you can make a one-off donation to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke, sort of if you just feel sorry for me but don't want to be tied into some sort of relationship.